Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Lehr with me, your host Imperial Dane, Master Instruction, Law and Propaganda. Talking today here about victory points, how important they are and how to prioritize them, because this is something I've been thinking about as well, because I've seen a bunch of replays lately just in hell that's been ongoing for some time again, where people just they'll focus immediately on victory points and not so much in everything else, and then sort of late game, in fact, they'll begin focusing resources more on victory points. But in reality, here's the thing. That's actually the opposite of the actual prioritization you want on victory points. Early on, victory points actually don't matter a lot. They have less value than they do later into the game, because in the early game, you want resources, you want fuel, you want munitions, you want all of that. Victory points don't actually matter so much. You might ask, why is that thing? Well, how many tanks can you get for your victory points? How many light machine guns, artillery pieces, doctrines? None. And that's the important thing. Victory points are a sort of time thing, an attritional resource in a sense. But you can't, use it for anything. Whereas fuel, munitions, all that matter. Thusly, the important bit is, while victory points are nice, fuel is even nicer and more important. Of course, denying your opponent fuel is more important and nice as well. So, when it comes to victory points, you actually don't want to focus so much on them in the early moments. Sure, there'll be a few victory points split off here and there, but long term, if you have more tanks than your opponents, you're going to just win them and just get all the victory points anyways and hold them better. And usually in the later game, that's where I want victory points to be more important, though. Ironically, this is where then most people then forget about the victory points, in fact, deprioritize them over the resources, when in reality, again, it should be the other way around. You should be focusing on the victory points in the late game, where again they're going to have more impact because you already got more resources. In fact, if you have a ton of fuel, it's much better to just focus on victory points and that way bleed out your opponent. So when you go for the victory points, the early game, let's see players go for it, particularly in high rank players, you go everything for example for the center victory point, just ignore the fuel. I'm just thinking, what on earth are you doing, mate? What are you doing? You're achieving absolutely nothing. Your tanks aren't going to run your victory point. Your tech isn't going to, run in victory points. You're going to these aren't going to get light machine guns on the victory points. They're not going to throw victory point grenades. Nothing like that at all. So in that sense, again, focus on fuel and munitions first, early game, victory points later on, and then of course keep the victory point later on, because again, there'll be all these sort of weird things where people just ignore them and not use the abilities to quickly secure them. Like for example, you got breakthrough from encirclement, counterattack tactics from mobile defense, raid tag from recon support. All these sort of abilities can quickly allow you to grab points, in particular victory points, can actually be quite impactful. As I can tell you again, if you're particularly close and you're both low, these sort of abilities can have a massive impact. But it's usually then where people then more than anything just neglect these abilities. Well, they just neglect them in general. So these sort of things you want to keep in mind when it comes to victory points as well. These sort of abilities like breakthrough and raid tactics also work on victory points. You can that way quickly just grab them for yourself rapidly before your opponent has any chance of doing anything. So that's a little further notice then. Victory points, how do you just do a bit better with. Another fun fact about victory points is they're usually the one point where you can actually place sandbags behind the list. Normal sandbags, not the stereotype of piles of dirt with sandbags sprinkled across, where you can actually place them and your opponent can't actually use the sandbags very well. They are rather unique in that sense. For some of these types of sandbags, they actually just sort of fit perfectly with the victory point side. So you can, for example, use them as well to just quickly lay up the sandbags and hide right behind them. Another little tip is, if overall possible, consider lining up your defense, at least your initial sort of pushes around victory points. Again, you're not necessarily grabbing the victory points, but sort of, if you have victory points, try and line them up as the ones that close to each other. So, for example, here, you then want to have like these two victory points, or you want to hold these two victory points. That way you can sort of also establish a much more effective defense of the victory points. We can have a sort of few groups defending each directly, and then sort of assemble a reserve, for example, in this area can then sort of react to movements towards either victory point, while then at the same time maybe detach a smaller group harassing the opponent's victory point over there. If you hold all three victory points, great, amazing, but again, if you're sort of being more modest, just securing the two closest victory points tend to also the long term be an efficient strategy. Though again, if you absolutely have to, and again the centre is just too difficult, because again a lot of players just tend to just pour everything into the centre. Of course, you want to avoid over focusing the centre. Holding the other two is great, but in this case again, having a tactical reserve that can quickly react is more important. Really important. In these cases, you might also consider using the momentum to try and get behind the opponent's line. That way, sort of crash the centre and then seal the victory point their way. Further good of use, of course, is mining the victory points. So if you can, lay down machine gun bunkers or whatever. In particular, on the victory points on the side, since they're more likely to just have a single unit being sent towards them, no big pushes. This is sort of where machine gun bunkers, finding positions, all that become a lot more valuable, since that way you can easily just stop harasser, force them to expend more resources like tanks and that sort of things to then deal with these sort of more far-flung positions. So that's sort of a further little tip or detail there. It's sort of assisting you defending your victory points efficiently. But again, the primary key of this and primary takeaway, which I like to repeat, is they don't matter a lot in the early game, because again, they don't give you resources. What matters is the fuel and the munitions. You prioritize those in the early game. Later in the game, you begin shifting your priorities towards the victory points once you've established fuel and munitions and all that, because then you're going to be less bothered usually by so many disruptions. Otherwise, in the early game, any sort of resource disruption, then an opponent that you goes for them can easily throw you off a lot in the early game, can really just give them a huge advantage. Whereas again, like if they get sort of slight lead on victory points, it's not going to matter as much because they can't really translate it into anything except maybe if they can sort of bleed you up faster and win that way. But like if you have tanks faster than them, a lot faster, that's not going to matter usually in most of the cases. So when it comes down to it again, early game, victory points not so important. Mid game and sort of into late game, they become more important. But early game, focus on resources. Consider mining your victory points overall. Barbed wire and all that, of course, also quite helpful if you can lay down machine gun bunkers to cover them or whatever. Also useful. Definitely not bad, especially though for the ones on the sides. Center ones more likely to be covered by everything. Again, center usually is where most attention tends to get focused on, but a lot of players, so having defenders up there tends to sort of be less valuable because they're going to be first things shot at. And otherwise, consider just, lining up two closest victory points to each other and taking it from there. So I think it's sort of good starting rule of thumb. So there you go, a quick Propagandacast Lehr, sort of covering the topic of victory points, their importance, when to focus on them, when not to focus on them, and tricks sort of making it easier to defend. So hopefully this has been helpful to you. Hopefully this gives some more, fuel for your games when you're playing it, more substance. If it does, subscribe, like, share, comment on it. If you'd like to do, of course, do consider donating or pledging on Patreon. Links are in the video description. This is Imperial signing off, and see you all another time for another video. Cheers.